Eric could smell the burnt circuitry before he even opened the hatch. The stench of fried silicon and desperation, an odor as familiar to him as coffee in the morning, though it never woke him up quite the same way. He tugged on the handle, cursing the engineers who designed the hatch to stick just enough to annoy but not enough to warrant a repair request. "Damn thing," he muttered, giving it another yank. The hatch finally gave way with a groan that seemed to say, "Can't a door get some rest around here?" Inside was a veritable forest of tangled wires and blinking lights that looked like a nightclub for masochistic robots. Vila stood behind him, arms crossed, her expression equal parts amusement and exasperation. "You know, Eric, if you talked to people like you talk to machinery, you'd have a lot more friends. Why bother? Machines don't talk back." "Except for this one," Eric grunted, reaching into the mechanical mess to pull out what looked like a charred potato with wires sticking out of it. "And I'm pretty sure it's just swearing in binary." Vila snorted, a sound she insisted was sophisticated but that Eric privately thought made her sound like an unimpressed piglet. She fiddled with the datapad in her hand, scrolling through endless lines of code. "We've got a bigger problem than your inability to make friends, Eric. This," she gestured to the mechanical vomit, "is spreading faster than syphilis in a pirate colony." "Great, just what we need, another contagion," Eric sighed, tossing the burnt chunk into a bin already overflowing with yesterday's failures. "What's the big deal?" "It's not just any tech," Vila replied, pressing a few buttons. "It's alien, and it's not asking for permission to move in. It's making itself at home, screwing with our systems, and giving people enhancements." Eric raised an eyebrow. "Enhancements? Like the kind where you can finally remember why you walked into a room?" "No, smartass. Like enhanced cognition. People are becoming smarter, faster, but they're also becoming weird." "Weird, huh? That's a technical term, I assume." Vila ignored the jab, her face turning serious. "We're talking dangerously weird, Eric. People are hooked on this stuff like it's the newest drug on the market." "Hooked?" Eric glanced around the cramped engineering bay. "So, what? We've got a Dyson sphere full of junkies now?" "It's more like a Dyson sphere full of potential lunatics. The tech's addictive, and it might not be compatible with our human brains in the long run. You know, the usual alien tech problem." Eric grunted, turning back to the mess of wires. "I suppose fixing it isn't as easy as turning it off and on again?" "I wish," Vila replied, rubbing her temples. "We've got to figure out where it's coming from and how the hell to stop it." "Oh, brilliant," Eric said dryly. "Just the two of us against an entire city's worth of alien infestation." "Easy as pie." Vila shot him a look that could have melted glass. "Well, unless you've got any better ideas, we're it. Just think of it as a chance to make some new friends, maybe even some enemies." Eric chuckled, pulling another tangle of wires from the machine. "Enemies, huh? Well, at least they won't talk back either." They worked in relative silence for a while, the only sounds the occasional spark of a short circuit and Eric's muttered curses. Outside, Luminaris stretched endlessly, a metal shell of supposed progress and civilization. Humanity's crown jewel, they called it. A Dyson sphere so vast it made ancient empires look like playpens. And yet, here they were, fighting the tech equivalent of a head cold. "You ever wonder," Vila mused, breaking the quiet, "if this whole Dyson sphere idea was just humanity's way of compensating for something?" "Like what? Average height?" Eric replied, smirking. "Maybe," Vila said with a shrug. "Or maybe we're just trying to distract ourselves from the fact that we're tiny, insignificant specks in a universe that couldn't care less." "Wow, Vila, your optimism is contagious," Eric said, rolling his eyes. "Remind me to invite you to my next birthday party." Vila laughed, a genuine, if fleeting sound. "I'll bring the cake with the existential crises written in icing." "Perfect," Eric said. "I'll make sure there's enough whiskey to drown a small army's worth of sorrows." "Deal," Vila said, "but first, let's see if we can stop Luminaris from turning into a loony bin." They delved back into their work, the task at hand less about fixing the mess and more about keeping it from exploding in their faces. As they worked, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that they were prying open a can of worms labeled, "Do not touch, especially if you're human." After what felt like hours but was likely just minutes, Vila let out a low whistle. "I found something," she said, her voice laced with the kind of dread reserved for discovering a corpse in your closet. Eric leaned over, squinting at the screen. "What am I looking at?" Besides a migraine waiting to happen. The source, Vila replied, tapping the screen. Or at least, where the signal's strongest. It's coming from deep in the core. The core, Eric repeated, feeling the weight of the words like a stone in his gut. Yeah, Vila said, the place they tell everyone never to go, because what's down there isn't just above our pay grade, it's in a whole different universe. Fantastic, Eric said, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. A field trip to the core. Just what I always wanted. Look on the bright side, Vila said, forcing a smile. We might find something that doesn't want to kill us. Sure, Eric replied, and maybe we'll find a nice, friendly alien who just wants to give us a hug. Vila smirked. One can dream. If I had time to dream, I wouldn't be stuck here with you, Eric shot back. The banter was familiar, comfortable even. A small reprieve from the constant, oppressive weight of the unknown looming over them. But Eric knew it was just that, a reprieve. Soon enough, they'd be diving headfirst into the abyss, hoping not to drown. All right, let's suit up, Vila said, closing the datapad with a decisive snap. The sooner we get this over with, the sooner we can find out if humanity's got a fighting chance against its own stupidity. Eric nodded, stuffing a handful of tools into his utility belt. Here's to hoping this isn't our last bad decision. If it is, Vila said, at least we'll go out with a bang, right? Or a whimper, Eric replied, pulling on his suit. Either way, it'll be dramatic. With suits on and tools in hand, they made their way out of the engineering bay, the door hissing shut behind them with an ominous finality. As they descended into the depths of Luminaris, Eric couldn't help but think that if humanity's last stand was in the form of two slightly disgruntled engineers, maybe the universe really did have a twisted sense of humor. The corridors grew darker, the hum of machinery louder, as they ventured deeper into the core. The air was tinged with a metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat like an unwanted guest. You know, Eric said, his voice echoing in the cavernous hallway, if this turns out to be a wild goose chase, I'm blaming you. Vila chuckled, her voice a touch too strained to be truly amused. Don't worry, I'd expect nothing less. They reached the door to the core's inner sanctum, a massive slab of metal that seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Here we go, Vila said, her hand hovering over the control panel. Last chance to turn back, Eric offered, more out of habit than hope. Too late for second thoughts, Vila replied, pressing the button. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a room bathed in eerie, pulsing light. At the center stood a machine, its design alien and unknowable, a tangle of wires and circuits that seemed to pulse with an almost organic life. Well, Eric said, staring at the contraption. This looks welcoming. Yeah, Vila agreed, stepping forward cautiously. Like a birthday present wrapped in a bomb. As they approached, the machine seemed to react, lights flickering, a low hum growing in intensity. Vila? Eric said, an edge of panic creeping into his voice. I see it, Vila replied, eyes fixed on the machine. Whatever this is, it's waking up. Eric swallowed hard, and something tells me it's not in a good mood. The hum became a roar, the room trembling as if the machine's very presence was enough to shake the foundations of Luminaris. Great, Eric muttered, watching as the lights danced like a million tiny eyes opening all at once. Just great. Vila took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving the machine. Ready for this? About as ready as I'll ever be, Eric said, gripping his tools like they were a lifeline. The machine surged, a wave of energy washing over them, and in that moment, Eric knew that whatever happened next, it was going to be one hell of a ride. Here we go, he whispered, as the world around them exploded into chaos. The machine in the core hummed like it was gearing up for a performance, and it sure wasn't singing any lullabies. As the room trembled, Vela's eyes darted from her datapad to the alien monstrosity before them. Eric wished he could conjure up the same level of focus, but all he could muster was a mounting sense of dread and the urge to bolt. Hey, he said, trying to sound casual, which was difficult when every bone in his body was telling him to run. This thing's not gonna explode, right? Not unless I press the wrong button, Vila replied, her fingers dancing over the datapad. But don't worry, I'll make sure to get us both killed gracefully. That's comforting, Eric muttered, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Really puts my mind at ease. Relax, Eric, Vila said, though her eyes betrayed her own nervousness. This thing's a big alien jigsaw puzzle. We've just got to figure out which piece goes where. Except if we screw up, the pieces blow up in our faces, Eric pointed out. Details, Vila said with a smirk. We should focus on the big picture. Eric sighed, glancing around the eerie glow of the core. Right, big picture. Like the fact that this tech is making everyone smarter but crazy as hell. Pretty much, Vila agreed. I downloaded some data earlier. This tech is spreading like a virus, enhancing cognition in unpredictable ways. Yeah, I get that, Eric said, scratching his head. But how come no one's thought to just, I dunno, turn it off? Vila shook her head. Wish it was that simple. It's not just tangled in our systems, it's like it's got its own mind. Like it's directing itself. So what you're saying is, Eric said, eyeing the pulsing alien machine, we're dealing with a techno-parasite that thinks it's the boss. Exactly, Vila replied, and it's got all the charm of a rabid skunk. The lights flickered and Eric felt a chill creep up his spine. Okay, so we need to either find a way to talk to this thing or cut its power. Preferably without ending up as stardust. Talking might be easier, Vila said, glancing at her datapad. It's got some sort of communication protocol, but it's all encrypted in what looks like a badly designed Sudoku puzzle. Aliens and their puzzles, Eric grumbled. Why can't they just write a damn instruction manual? Because then it wouldn't be mysterious and terrifying, Vila replied, flashing a quick smile. Besides, where's the fun in that? Fun, Eric repeated, shaking his head. Yeah, I'm having a blast. The machine's hum intensified, and for a moment, Eric swore he could hear a voice, a whisper at the edge of perception, like the universe's worst ASMR track. He blinked, trying to shake the sensation. You hear that? He asked. Vila nodded, her eyes narrowing. It's like it's trying to speak. But it's using a language we don't understand. Figures, Eric said, scratching at his chin. You think it can understand us? Only one way to find out, Vila replied, her fingers flying over the datapad. I'm going to try something. Define something, Eric said, warily eyeing the machine. Something mildly disastrous, Vila said, tapping a sequence into the datapad. So, our usual. A surge of energy rippled through the air, and the machine's lights shifted from a dull glow to a blinding radiance. Eric shielded his eyes, cursing under his breath. Vila, he shouted over the rising din. I know, Vila yelled back. I think it's working. You call this working? Eric barked, struggling to maintain his footing as the room shook. The machine's light coalesced into a single point, and then, just as quickly as it began, the chaos subsided. The light dimmed, and a voice, clear as day, echoed in their minds. Who dares disturb the Nexus? Well, Eric said, lowering his hand, it looks like we made a friend. Vila, wide-eyed and pale, stared at the machine. I didn't expect it to actually answer. Neither did I, Eric said, his voice tinged with awe and fear. Guess we should say hi. Hello, Vila said, her voice wavering slightly. We're, humans. From Luminaris. The machine seemed to consider this before responding, its voice vibrating through their skulls. Humans. Intriguing. You have awoken the Nexus. State your purpose. Well, Nexus, Eric said, trying to sound more confident than he felt, we're here to ask if you could kindly stop screwing with our heads. The Nexus emitted a sound that might have been a chuckle or a glitch. Your cognitive enhancements are a side effect of integration. Necessary for survival. Necessary? Vila asked. For what? To understand, the Nexus replied. To evolve. Look, Eric said, stepping forward, we're all for upgrading the brain software, but not at the price of our sanity. The process is complex, the Nexus explained. But fear not. The benefits outweigh the risks. Tell that to the folks who've gone loony, Vila muttered. Your kind struggles with change, the Nexus observed. Adaptation is inevitable, sure, but at what cost? Vila asked, her voice firm. We're losing people to this. It's not just change, it's chaos. The Nexus paused, its glow pulsing gently. Your concerns are noted. Adjustments may be possible. Eric exchanged a glance with Vila. Adjustments? What kind of adjustments? Stabilization of cognitive enhancements, the Nexus replied. Reducing adverse effects. Okay, Eric said, cautiously optimistic. But what's in it for you? Data. The Nexus answered simply. Understanding your species enhances our own knowledge. So we're guinea pigs, Vila said flatly. Participants, the Nexus corrected. In a mutual exchange of growth. Eric couldn't help but chuckle. Well, at least someone benefits from our madness. The Nexus's lights flickered, almost as if it were laughing along. An opportunity for symbiosis. Symbiosis, Vila echoed, her skepticism evident. Right, as long as it doesn't kill us. Survival is paramount, the Nexus assured. You are valuable. Glad to be of service, Eric said with a smirk. So, can you make these changes? Or do we need to do a human sacrifice or something? Alterations can be made, the Nexus confirmed. But I require time. Time's something we're short on, Vila said, glancing at Eric. The longer this goes on, the more unstable things get. Understood, the Nexus replied. I will expedite the process. Appreciate it, Eric said, though a part of him wondered if trusting a sentient alien machine was a step too far. Anything we can do to help? Maintain current operations, the Nexus advised. Avoid interference. Which means, Vila said with a nod, we should leave you to it. Correct, the Nexus said. I will initiate the modifications. Guess that's our cue, Eric said, looking around. Time to get out of here before this thing changes its mind. The Nexus's glow softened, a gentle luminescence that seemed almost reassuring. Farewell, humans. May our paths converge again. Yeah, Eric said, moving towards the door. Catch you on the flip side, Nexus. Vila followed, her datapad tucked under her arm. Let's hope we didn't just make the worst decision of our lives. The door to the core sealed shut behind them, and as they began their ascent back to the surface, Eric felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. They'd made contact, sure, but what that meant in the long run was anybody's guess. Do you think we can trust it? Vila asked, breaking the silence. Trust? Eric echoed, considering the word. Maybe not, but I think we can work with it. That's something, I guess, Vila said. Let's just hope it doesn't change its mind and decide we're better off as lab rats. Yeah, Eric agreed, his thoughts swirling with 1,000 what-ifs. But hey, at least now we've got a bargaining chip. As they emerged back into the familiar chaos of Luminaris, the world seemed a little less daunting, the shadows a little less oppressive. They had a plan, flimsy and precarious, sure, but a plan nonetheless. One step at a time, Vila said, echoing his thoughts. One step at a time, Eric agreed, his voice steady as they stepped into the uncertain future. And with that, they walked back into the fray, two unlikely engineers armed with wits, sarcasm, and a newfound ally in the depths of the Dyson sphere. Whatever came next, they knew it would be a hell of a journey, and for once, they felt ready to face it, together. Eric muttered under his breath as he and Vila navigated the labyrinthine corridors of Luminaris, the city that prided itself on being the beacon of human ingenuity and, ironically, was now reduced to a flickering mess of power outages and malfunctions. Half the lights were on the fritz, casting the entire area into a chaotic strobe light scene that would make any rave organizer jealous. Is it just me, or do things feel more apocalyptic than usual? Eric grumbled, stepping over a bundle of exposed wires that looked more like a technological spaghetti gone wrong. Depends on your definition of apocalyptic, Vila replied, her nose buried in her datapad. If you mean, things are about to go belly up, then yes, definitely. Ahead of them, a pair of engineers were frantically arguing next to a smoking terminal. No, you idiot, if you cross that wire, one of them shouted, just as a shower of sparks erupted between them. A loud bang followed, and they both stumbled back, coughing. Eric raised an eyebrow. Well, at least they're not bored. Vila snorted. Yeah, nothing like a bit of fiery death to spice up an otherwise mundane workday. They weaved through the chaos, dodging workers who were just as likely to be on fire as functioning. The entire city was teetering on the edge, like a drunkard who couldn't decide which way to fall. Vila stopped suddenly, her eyes widening at something on her datapad. Eric, she said, a hint of panic creeping into her voice. I think I found something. Eric, who'd been eyeing a particularly precarious ceiling panel, turned to her. What is it? More bad news? Because my cup of optimism is overflowing as it is. This, she said, holding up the datapad for him to see. Lines of code scrolled rapidly across the screen, alien symbols interspersed with human script, a digital cocktail designed to make even the most seasoned techie weep. What's it say? Eric asked, squinting at the gibberish. It's not what it says, it's what it implies, Vila said, her fingers dancing across the screen. These sequences, they're not just enhancing cognition. They're redirecting behavior. Redirecting behavior? Like what? Teaching people to finally put the toilet seat down. Vila shot him a look. No, like making us more efficient at maintaining their tech. It's subtle, but it's there. The enhancements are not just upgrades, they're turning us into an unpaid workforce. Eric let out a low whistle, his usual humor momentarily stripped away. Well, that's a neat trick. Upgrade the humans, and you've got yourself a self-sustaining maintenance crew. How considerate, condescending bastards, Vila muttered. The Nexus isn't just about symbiosis. It's about exploitation. Eric ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the revelation sink in. So, what do we do? Shut it down? Turn it off and on again? Not that simple, Vila said. We need to figure out how deep this goes. And we need to make sure the others aren't already too far gone. As they continued through the corridors, the situation around them deteriorated further. A group of workers was attempting to manually operate a hydraulic lift. The machine groaned in protest, then collapsed in a heap of twisted metal. People scattered, cursing and shouting. We're running out of time, Eric said, his voice barely audible above the din. Vila nodded. If this keeps up, we'll have more than just a few malfunctions on our hands. The whole city could fall apart. Great, Eric said dryly. Our lives are in the hands of a city that's one power outage away from being a dystopian theme park. They reached the central operations room, a hub of chaos, where technicians were frantically trying to keep the systems from going completely haywire. Screens flickered, alarms blared, and the air was thick with the scent of burnt circuitry. Looks like a scene from How Not to Run a City, Eric quipped as they stepped inside. Vila quickly tapped into the main console, her fingers moving with a speed that suggested both urgency and desperation. Eric watched as streams of data scrolled across the screens, none of it making any more sense to him than it had before. So, what's the plan, fearless leader? He asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. First, we stop the Nexus from continuing its manipulation, Vila said, eyes fixed on the screen. Then, we figure out how to reverse whatever changes it's already made. Easy peasy, Eric said, though he doubted it would be anything of the sort. And if that doesn't work? Pray we die quickly? Vila suggested, half smiling. Sounds reasonable, Eric replied, nodding. All right, let's get to it then. They worked feverishly, Vila navigating the labyrinthine code while Eric did his best to assist, mostly by staying out of her way. Hours passed, and the city's condition grew more precarious by the minute. They're using us, Eric, Vila said suddenly, breaking the silence. The Nexus. It's got us trapped in its web. And the more we try to fix things, the deeper we get entangled. Like a giant cosmic flytrap, Eric said. Should have seen it coming, really. Vila sighed, rubbing her eyes. I thought we could handle this. But it's so much bigger than we realized. Then let's get bigger, Eric said, determination creeping into his voice. We can't let them win. We've got to show them we're not just pawns in their game. Vila nodded, a hint of fire returning to her eyes. You're right. Okay, let's do this. If we can isolate the Nexus's control nodes, we might be able to disrupt its influence. Disrupt sounds good, Eric said. I'm all for disruption. They dove back into the work, their resolve stealing with each passing moment. But as they toiled, the Nexus seemed to sense their intentions. The room trembled, lights flickering ominously. Looks like it's onto us, Eric observed with a grimace. Then let's give it something to worry about, Vila shot back. With renewed focus, they targeted the control nodes, each successful hit sending ripples of instability through the Nexus's network. The city around them responded in kind, systems faltering as the alien influence began to weaken. It's working, Vila said, her voice a mix of relief and disbelief. Yeah, but for how long? Eric replied. We need to finish this before it regroups. They pushed on, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. The city's fate, and perhaps their own, hung in the balance. Almost there, Vila said, her fingers flying across the keys. Just one more. A sudden jolt rocked the room, sending Eric sprawling. The Nexus, in a final act of defiance, had triggered a feedback loop, causing systems to overload and threaten to take the city with them. Vila, Eric shouted, scrambling to his feet. I'm on it, she called back, her voice steady despite the chaos. Eric watched as she tackled the problem head-on, her determination unwavering. He could only hope that their gamble would pay off. The room shuddered violently, and Eric braced himself against the console, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. If they failed now, all their efforts would be for nothing. But Vila, ever the genius under pressure, found a way. With a final keystroke, she severed the feedback loop, stabilizing the systems and halting the Nexus's assault. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing. Did we do it? Eric asked, half expecting the room to explode in his face. Vila checked the readouts, then nodded. We did it. The Nexus is offline, at least, for now. Well, what do you know? Eric said, a grin breaking through his exhaustion. Looks like humanity gets to live another day. Vila allowed herself a small, victorious smile. For now, anyway. But we need to stay vigilant. This isn't over. Not by a long shot, Eric agreed, glancing around at the room that had become their battlefield. As they stepped out into the still chaotic corridors of Luminaris, Eric felt a strange mixture of relief and lingering dread. They'd bought themselves some time, but the larger threat still loomed. So, what's next? He asked, falling into step beside Vila. Next? She replied, with a weary shrug. We find a way to ensure this doesn't happen again. Make sure the Nexus can't just switch back on and pick up where it left off. Sounds like a plan, Eric said, trying to inject some optimism into his voice. Together, they navigated the maze of malfunctioning systems and confused workers, knowing that their journey was far from over. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but armed with their wits and a stubborn refusal to give up, they were ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. As they emerged into the dimly lit streets of Luminaris, Eric couldn't help but chuckle. Well, Vila, it's been one hell of a day. That it has, she replied, her smile tinged with fatigue. And something tells me it's only going to get more interesting. Wouldn't have it any other way, Eric said with a wink. And with that, they ventured into the uncertain night, united in their resolve to protect their city, and their freedom, from the enigmatic forces that sought to control them. Whatever lay ahead, they knew they wouldn't face it alone. The city of Luminaris was teetering on the brink of chaos, like a drunk standing at the edge of a cliff. One wrong move away from a very messy end. Eric and Vila had made it back to their shabby bolt hole, which had conveniently escaped the city's latest power outage. Probably because the electricity had given up on it long ago. Eric plopped into the only chair that wasn't broken, while Vila remained glued to her datapad, her brow furrowed in concentration. The room was dimly lit, the faint glow from the datapad casting shadows like ghostly dancers on the walls. Well, that went swimmingly, Eric said, sarcasm dripping from each word like acid from a leaky battery. The Nexus is offline, sure, but the rest of the city still looks like a scrapyard on fire. Vila smirked without looking up. I'm pretty sure scrapyards are supposed to be on fire. Adds to the ambiance. Ah, ambiance. Always the traitor in disguise, Eric replied, rubbing his temples. So, now that we've bought ourselves some time before the Nexus tries to make us its personal repair crew again, what's next on our list of suicidal tasks? She finally tore her eyes from the datapad. Find others like us. People who haven't gotten their brains scrambled by the alien tech. We need a resistance, not just a two-person running gag. Right, because there's nothing more comforting than trusting people when everything's going to hell, Eric mumbled. Any ideas on who might still have a couple of brain cells to rub together? Well, Vila said, tapping her datapad and bringing up a list of names, I've got a few suspects. Some folks who were either off-grid during the infection or just too damn stubborn to let their minds be hijacked. Eric snorted. Stubborn, huh? Sounds like we might just get along. They went over the list, which read like a who's who of Luminaris's least sociable inhabitants. There was Hal the mechanic, who'd rather eat his own foot than use automated tools. Mira, an information broker who trusted no one, not even herself. And a smattering of other misfits who somehow hadn't been sucked into the Nexus's web. All right, Vila said, pocketing her datapad. Let's go meet our potential allies. Or, if we're lucky, our future ex-friends. The streets were a mess of confusion and sporadic violence, like a mosh pit with a touch of desperation. People staggered around, eyes vacant and movements erratic, as though participating in a particularly bad flash mob. The Nexus might have been offline, but its effects lingered like a bad hangover. Their first stop was Hal's workshop, a place so cluttered it made chaos look organized. Hal himself was a grizzled man with hands as greasy as his sense of humor. He looked up from a disassembled engine, a scowl etched into his face. "What do you want? Unless you're here to give me a reason to finally take that long nap I've been promising myself." Eric grinned. "Tempting, but no. We're forming a club for people who aren't mind-controlled by glowing alien things." "You in?" Hal grunted, wiping his hands on a rag only slightly less filthy than his hands. "You mean to say there's folks out there who aren't suckling at the alien teat? Consider me interested." After a brief, cynical exchange about the shoddy state of humanity, they left Hal to his engine and continued on to Myra's hideout. She was a wiry woman with the eyes of a hawk and the patience of a caffeinated squirrel. She greeted them with a wary nod, arms crossed. "What's the word on the street, Eric?" "The word is, help," Eric said, cutting to the chase. "We're gathering a group of the city's least mind-controlled to shut down the Nexus for good." Mira snorted. "That's a tall order, even for someone without every system trying to make them dance like a puppet on a string." Vila jumped in. "The Nexus is offline, at least for now. But it's going to come back, with a vengeance. We need to stop it before it turns the whole city into its personal circuit board." Mira considered this, drumming her fingers on her arm. "Well, you're not wrong. Stopping this little AI invasion sounds like a good idea, if only to keep my business from turning into a charity." With a nod, Mira agreed to join their ragtag team of the cognitively unshackled. As they made their way to the next potential recruit, Eric found himself wondering how many people were still left in control of their own thoughts. The Nexus, however, wasn't going down without a fight. As if sensing their attempts to rally the masses, it started cranking up the volume on its mental influence, making it harder for people to think straight. The streets were becoming a paranoia-laden war zone, where trust was as rare as a clean air filter. Their final recruit was Zamir, a once famous navigator who'd fallen out of favor when star maps became as common as spots on a teenager's face. He was holed up in a tiny flat that smelled faintly of regret and expensive taste gone sour. Zamir looked up from a holographic star chart, his eyes focusing with difficulty. "Ah, visitors. What do I owe the pleasure? Or is it pain? Sometimes it's so hard to tell." "Think it's time to pick a side," Vila said without preamble. "We're mounting a defense against the Nexus. Before it turns the city into its personal brain trust." Zamir laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "Ah, fighting back against the inevitable. Always a noble cause, if a futile one." "Futil's our middle name," Eric retorted. "Besides, you in or are you just going to sit here and let them turn your brain into a scrambled mess?" With a resigned shrug, Zamir rose and nodded. "Very well, at least if I die, it won't be of boredom." Their motley crew assembled. Eric couldn't ignore the growing tension among the city's inhabitants. It was like walking through a field of landmines. A wrong step and they'd find themselves at the center of an explosion, both literal and figurative. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Eric said, standing amidst their small gathering. "We've got a team. Now let's figure out how to stop an alien AI from enslaving the rest of us." Hal raised a hand, as if in school. "Question. Do we even know what we're doing?" Eric chuckled darkly. "Does anyone ever? We're just making it up as we go along." Mira tapped her foot impatiently. "Less talk, more action. How do we make sure the Nexus stays offline?" Vila cleared her throat, stepping forward. "The control nodes. We need to disable them permanently. We've got to hit them where it hurts, make sure they can't just reboot and pick up where they left off." Zamir, ever the cynic, leaned in. "And how do we know we won't just end up doing exactly what they want? That we're not part of some grand plan to make us sabotage ourselves?" "Because if this is their plan, it's a pretty terrible one," Eric replied. "And I refuse to believe aliens are as bad at planning as we are." The group shared a grim laugh, a thin thread of camaraderie forming despite the looming threat. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were all they had. The aliens, however, were not content to let their puppets wander free. Around them, the city was an orchestra of chaos, each note a misstep into madness. The alien influence was a siren call, tugging at the edges of their minds, whispering promises of unity and order. They gathered in a nondescript, crumbling building that had once been used for something or other, now just another casualty of neglect. Inside, they spread out blueprints of the city's control systems, marking potential targets with the enthusiasm of a kid picking a target in a game of pin the tail on the donkey. Hal traced a finger along the map. Here, here, and here. These are the main nodes. If we can take them down, the Nexus won't be able to boot back up without a serious overhaul. Sounds simple enough, Eric said. Except for the part where the city's against us, the aliens are against us, and we're not exactly working with a full deck. Hey, at least we've got enthusiasm, Vila said, trying to keep things light. Mira tapped a finger on the map. And a plan that relies on a miracle or two. Miracles we can handle, Zamir said, a rare smile gracing his lips. It's the logical stuff that always trips us up. As they made preparations, the city's unrest boiled over. People who'd once been neighbors were now potential threats. The alien influence was like a drug, and withdrawal wasn't pretty. Fights broke out over nothing, turning the streets into a battleground where trust was currency and everyone was bankrupt. Their group moved cautiously, each step measured, every word weighed. It was like playing chess with a blindfold, against an opponent who could read minds. Eric led them through the maze of alleys and side streets, their path lit by flickering streetlights that cast shadows like accusatory fingers. We've got one shot at this. If we fail, we're as good as reprogrammed. Hal snorted. Dead, but at least we'll go out with a bang. The first control node loomed ahead, an imposing structure that looked like it had been designed by someone with a love of both brutalist architecture and migraines. It hummed ominously, as if aware of their intentions. All right, folks, Eric said, drawing in a deep breath. This is it, let's shut this thing down. With tools and determination, they descended on the node, working in silent coordination. Sparks flew as wires were cut, panels pried open, and circuits overridden. They moved quickly, aware that time was not on their side. The node shuddered, groaned, and then fell silent, its once menacing hum reduced to nothing more than a whisper of electricity. One down, Vila said, wiping sweat from her brow. 2 to go. Their victory was short-lived. As they moved on to the next target, they encountered resistance. People swayed by the alien influence, eyes glassy and movements robotic. Hey, this isn't a dance, Eric shouted, dodging a wild swing. Get a grip, but there was no reasoning with them. The alien tech had wormed its way into their minds, and even with the Nexus offline, its tendrils still held sway. Our odds just got worse, Mira said, ducking a punch with practiced ease. Despite the mounting challenges, they pushed forward, their resolve hardening with every step. The city might have been against them, but they'd come too far to turn back now. As they approached the second node, Eric's mind raced with possibilities, his heart pounding like a drumbeat in his chest. Failure wasn't an option, not anymore. They'd come too far, risked too much. It was time to see this through, however it ended. Eric and his motley crew trudged through the labyrinthine back streets of Luminaris, the comforting sound of distant riots serving as their theme music. The city was in turmoil, but at least it had the decency to be predictable in its chaos. Around them, the air buzzed with tension, like a bad hangover that just wouldn't quit. Remind me why we're the ones playing heroes, Mira muttered, her eyes scanning the shadows like they owed her money. Because everyone else is too busy playing brain dead, Eric replied, stepping over a pile of something that might once have been a trash can. And I, for one, have no intention of donating my cerebrum to our alien overlords. Generous of you, Zamir said, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. I always knew you had a big heart, Eric. Not as big as my ego, though, Eric quipped. Keeps me warm at night. Their banter was a thin veneer over the reality of their situation. A city with more strings pulled than a marionette on opening night. The alien tech wasn't just a menace, it was a full-blown epidemic, and they were the only antibodies left in the system. As they approached the second control node, the subtle hum of the alien tech grew louder, like a particularly annoying fly that refused to be swatted. The structure loomed ahead, a monolith of bad ideas and worse execution. All right, team, Vila said, pulling out her datapad like a magician unveiling a card trick. Let's make this quick, before the welcoming committee arrives. Hal rolled his shoulders, his expression grim. I'm all for speed, but if anyone starts sprouting tentacles, I'm out. You wish, Mira snarked. A few extra limbs might actually make you useful. With tools in hand, they descended upon the node like vultures on a carcass, picking it apart with the practiced dexterity of those who had nothing left to lose. Sparks flew, wires snapped, and for a brief moment, they were the masters of their own fate. Then everything went to hell. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a low rumble, like the universe clearing its throat before delivering bad news. Around them, the air shimmered, the alien tech reacting to their sabotage with the enthusiasm of a child denied dessert. This isn't supposed to happen, right? Zamir asked, his voice too calm for comfort. Nope, Vila replied, her hands a blur over the datapad. But when does anything go according to plan? The node convulsed, the ground beneath them shifting like a snake shedding its skin. A pulse of energy shot through the air, and suddenly, everything was too bright, too loud, too wrong. Lovely, Eric sighed. I was just thinking we hadn't been nearly electrocuted in a while. People emerged from the shadows, their eyes glazed with the unmistakable sheen of alien influence. They moved with eerie precision, closing in like a pack of wolves with a taste for irony. Well, this just got awkward, Mira said, raising her fists. Anyone got a plan B? Fight like hell? Hal suggested, cracking his knuckles. Always the romantic, Zamir said dryly. The first wave hit them with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. Eric ducked, dodging a punch as he swung his wrench with wild abandon. Beside him, Vila parried a flurry of blows with her datapad, proving once and for all that technology could be wielded as a weapon, even if it was usually against common sense. The struggle was a dance of chaos, limbs flailing in a macabre ballet. Their attackers moved with unnerving coordination, driven by the alien tech's insidious whisper promising order and harmony. Eric found himself locked in a vicious grapple, his opponent's eyes reflecting nothing but emptiness. This is getting old, Eric grunted, twisting free with a well-placed kick. I miss the days when bad guys had the decency to be obvious. But the aliens had no need for such pleasantries. As the brawl raged on, it became clear that their influence was growing stronger, pushing the city closer to the brink with every passing moment. Is this really it? Vila gasped, swinging her datapad like a club. Is this how we go down? Not yet, Eric replied, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. We've been in tighter spots. When? Mira demanded, landing a solid blow that sent her opponent sprawling. Eric didn't have an answer. The truth was, they'd hit rock bottom and started digging. Their hope was as thin as the air in a malfunctioning spacesuit, but it was all they had. Somehow, they fought their way clear, the adrenaline pushing them to the brink and beyond. They retreated down a side alley, their breaths ragged and their bodies bruised but unbroken. That was fun, Zamir said, wiping blood from his lip. Let's never do it again. You read my mind, Eric replied, leaning against a wall that felt sturdier than his resolve. Vila looked up from her datapad, her expression grim. The nodes are reinforcing each other. We'll need more than brute force to take them down. How much more? Hal asked, his tone a blend of skepticism and resignation. A miracle, Vila admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Great, Eric muttered. Anyone got a spare miracle lying around? Their laughter was a fragile thing, a brittle shield against the encroaching despair. They were out of time, out of options, and quickly running out of hope. We're in a bind, Mira said, stating the obvious with all the flair of a pessimist at a motivational seminar. Eric nodded, surveying their ragtag group. They were tired, battered, but still standing. And in a city where every system was against them, that counted for something. We can't give up, he said, more to himself than anyone else. If we do, then they win. And I'm not about to let some glowing tech take what's left of my dignity. Yeah, I hear dignity's worth a lot these days, Zamir quipped, earning a snort from Mira. So what's the plan, fearless leader? Hal asked, his sarcasm a welcome relief from the grim reality. Simple, Eric said, squaring his shoulders. We take a breath, gather our wits, and try not to die. Revolutionary, Vila said, her smile a ghost of its former self. They sat in silence, the weight of their failure pressing down like a lead blanket. Around them, the city continued to unravel, the alien influence a cancer eating away at its very core. But even in their darkest hour, a stubborn ember of defiance burned within them. They were the last line of defense, the not-quite heroes in a story with no clear ending. And as long as they still drew breath, they weren't about to roll over and let the aliens win. "I guess it's time for that miracle," Eric said, pushing off the wall with renewed determination. "Let's hope the universe is feeling generous. Or at least has a sense of humor," Mira added, her own resolve hardening like steel. "Guess we'll find out," Hal said, checking his makeshift weapon with grim satisfaction. The path ahead was uncertain, the odds stacked higher than a Jenga tower on a windy day. But they were used to that. After all, what was life without a little uncertainty? Just another day in Luminaris, a city on the brink, with only a ragtag band of misfits to save it. As they regrouped, the city's eerie glow cast their shadows long and lean, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, they weren't alone. And as they prepared to face the unknown, a shared, silent understanding settled over them. Together, they might just stand a chance against whatever came next. Eric glanced around at his companions, the weight of leadership not nearly as crushing as the thought of doing nothing. "All right, gang, let's get this over with. We've got a city to save." And with that, they moved forward, one step closer to the unpredictable future. A future where hope was a rare commodity, but one they were willing to bet everything on. The ragtag group of misfits found themselves huddled in a dimly lit alley of Luminaris, the city's signature flickering streetlights providing all the ambiance of a haunted house's mood lighting. Their situation was dire, but they had survived worse. "Probably, I swear," Eric muttered, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "If we make it out of this alive, I'm going to retire to a nice, quiet planet. One without aliens, tech, or any kind of synthetic nightmares." "Good luck with that," Mira replied dryly, picking at a cut on her knuckle. "From what I hear, that planet doesn't exist. Might as well wish for a unicorn while you're at it." Zamir, always the practical one, leaned against the grimy wall, his gaze distant. "We need a plan, or a miracle. Preferably both." "Miracle's a stretch, but how about an idea?" Vila piped up, her datapad the only thing in the city still functioning with some semblance of sanity. "I've been thinking about those old neural patterns. You know, the ones they used back when the human brain was still the most advanced piece of tech around." Eric raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "You mean when people weren't susceptible to shiny alien tech that promises enlightenment and delivers mental scramble instead?" "Exactly," Vila said, tapping away at the screen. Her fingers moved with the speed and precision of someone who didn't have time to entertain doubts. "There's this old concept of neural patterning, essentially rewiring the mind to resist external influence. It's ancient, but it might just be crazy enough to work." Hal snorted, his skepticism as reliable as the sunrise, or in Luminaris's case, the next blackout. "Rewiring minds? Sounds more like a job for a shrink than a resistance fighter." "But if it works, we could free people from the alien tech's grip," Vila insisted, her tone laced with that rarest of commodities in Luminaris: hope. "You sure about this?" Eric asked, a hint of doubt creeping into his voice. "We don't have the luxury of trial and error. Unless error means we all get crispy fried by alien brainwaves," Mira added, ever the cynic. "I'm not sure of anything," Vila admitted, glancing around at her comrades. "But I'd rather try something proactive than sit here waiting for the end." Eric nodded, the choice clearer than he'd like to admit. "All right, let's say we give this brain hack a shot. How do we turn a bunch of tech zombies back into functioning people?" Vila paused, her eyes thoughtful. "We'll need to get to the core. It's where the alien machine is located, and it's the only place where we can broadcast a signal strong enough to override the tech." "The core?" Zamir echoed, his expression darkening. "That place is more fortified than a politician's ego." "Which is saying a lot," Hal added with a smirk. "Well, we've never been known for doing things the easy way," Eric said, forcing a smile. "How bad could it be?" Famous last words, Mira muttered under her breath. With the plan that barely qualified as one set, they gathered what little equipment they had left. The trek to the core would be fraught with danger and complications, but then again, what wasn't these days? In Luminaris, death was just the price of admission. As they navigated the chaotic streets, Vila explained her theory in more detail. The alien machine enhances cognition by tapping into neural pathways. If we can access these patterns, we might be able to block the signal or at least dull its effects. Might, Hal repeated, his skepticism still firmly intact. That's a comforting word. I'll take might over certain doom any day, Zamir said, his tone grim but resolute. They reached a narrow alley that led towards the core, the space between buildings just wide enough to make them feel claustrophobic. The air hummed with latent energy, the alien tech's influence palpable and oppressive. Feels like we're walking into a meat grinder, Mira said, eyeing the shadows warily. Well, lucky for you, I'm feeling especially grindy today, Eric replied, his sarcasm a thin veil over his apprehension. The core loomed ahead, an imposing structure lit by an ominous glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the heart of the alien infestation, pulsating with a rhythm that mocked their every step. Anyone else feel like we're being watched? Hal asked, his eyes scanning the empty windows above, each one like a darkened eye socket judging their every move. More like we're being graded, Eric muttered. And I was never any good at tests. They stood at the entrance, the door a relic from a time when security meant more than just a padlock. Vila worked her magic, fingers dancing across the datapad with a seemingly effortless grace. Once we're in, head for the main terminal, Vila instructed. I'll need a few minutes to upload the countermeasures. A few minutes we might not have, Mira noted, her skepticism firmly in place. Then let's make them count, Eric said, bracing himself for the inevitable chaos. The door creaked open, a sound that seemed to echo in the stillness, and they stepped into the core. The space was vast, a labyrinth of technology and alien architecture fused into a nightmarish tapestry. Machines hummed with an eerie life, their surfaces reflecting the sickly green light that suffused the room. Welcome to the belly of the beast, Zamir said, his voice barely above a whisper. More like the colon, Hal corrected, earning a snort from Mira. They moved quickly, navigating the maze with an urgency born of desperation. Around them, the alien tech pulsed, a living entity that seemed to sense their presence. Vila immediately set to work on the main terminal, her fingers a blur of motion. The rest of them took up defensive positions, eyes peeled for any sign of trouble. I've got a bad feeling about this, Mira said, her voice tight with anticipation. I'd be worried if you didn't, Eric replied, gripping his weapon with a grim determination. As Vila continued her work, the alien machine responded, its systems flaring to life with a malevolent energy. The room filled with a low thrum, a hypnotic pulse that tugged at their senses. Whatever you're doing, do it faster, Zamir urged, his eyes flicking nervously to the shifting shadows. I'm trying, Vila shot back, sweat beading on her forehead. This isn't exactly child's play. Suddenly, the room seemed to breathe, the walls contracting with a palpable tension. Figures emerged from the shadows, their movements synchronized and deliberate. Looks like we've got company, Hal said, his voice a steady anchor amidst the gathering storm. Just how I like it, Eric replied, raising his weapon. Uninvited and heavily armed, the fight was as brutal and chaotic as any they'd faced, with attackers closing in from all sides. The alien tech seemed to animate their foes, lending them a coordination that was as unnerving as it was deadly. Eric swung his weapon with abandon, each impact a reminder of their precarious situation. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, a potent cocktail that sharpened his senses and dulled his fear. Keep them off me, Vila shouted, her focus unwavering even as the room descended into chaos. Easier said than done, Mira grunted, landing a punch that sent her opponent staggering. The battle was a blur of motion and noise, the clash of metal on metal interspersed with the dull thud of bodies hitting the ground. They fought with a ferocity born of necessity, each moment a desperate bid for survival. Almost there, Vila called, her voice a lifeline amidst the tumult. Make it snappy, Zamir replied, parrying a blow with all the finesse of a seasoned warrior. With one final keystroke, Vila completed her task, the terminal emitting a high-pitched whine that resonated throughout the room. The alien machine shuddered, its systems faltering as the countermeasure took hold. The effect was immediate and profound. Their attackers staggered, confusion replacing the eerie coordination that had marked their movements. The room seemed to exhale, the oppressive weight lifting as the alien influence ebbed. It's working, Vila said, her voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. About time we caught a break, Hal commented, wiping sweat from his brow. Don't jinx it, Mira cautioned, scanning the room for any lingering threats. They regrouped, their breaths ragged but triumphant. The countermeasure had worked, but it was only the beginning. They had a city to save, and this small victory was just a step on the long road to liberation. We did it, Eric said, a rare smile playing on his lips. Yeah, for now, Vila replied, her own smile tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. Their laughter echoed in the silence, a fragile thing that spoke of hope and defiance. They were far from finished, but in that moment, they allowed themselves the luxury of celebrating a win. All right, let's move, Eric said, leading them out of the core. We've got a lot of work to do, and I'm not about to let a little thing like common sense get in the way. Amen to that, Zamir agreed, his resolve as unyielding as ever. And so they set out, a band of weary warriors with hope in their hearts and sarcasm at the ready. In a city where nothing was certain, they were determined to write their own ending, one snarky comment at a time. The clang of metal on metal was a familiar, albeit unwelcome, soundtrack to their lives. Eric could almost hum the tune. As they emerged from the core, he glanced back at the pulsating alien architecture receding into the shadows. You know, he said, if we survive this, I'm definitely retiring. Maybe open a bar on some peaceful rock where the only thing trying to scramble my brain is cheap whiskey. Vila snorted, the datapad cradled like a newborn. A quiet planet? Those don't exist. Even if they did, you'd probably find a way to piss off the locals. Retirement? Mira piped in, rolling her eyes. Only thing you're retiring from is common sense. We live in a city that goes dark more often than my ex's sense of humor. Zamir was silent, which was basically his way of saying, the universe is screwed, so why bother? But when he did speak, it was like a wisdom bomb. We need to hit the Dyson Sphere's main grid. If this countermeasure works, we can reboot the whole damn system. Might even scare the aliens off, make them rethink their life choices. Because nothing's more terrifying than humans with a plan, Hal quipped, eyeing the skyline where the flickering streetlights of Luminaris did their half-hearted impression of a light show. They moved through the city, a ragtag band of misfits with nothing but hope and sarcasm as their weapons. The streets were eerily empty, the kind of empty that usually meant bad news was lurking around the corner. The only sound was the hum of the alien tech, a constant reminder of the city's slow descent into madness. Anyone else feel like we're the punchline to a cosmic joke? Eric asked, gripping his weapon tighter as they approached the Dyson Sphere's control hub. More like the setup, Vila replied. We haven't even got to the punchline yet. The control hub loomed ahead, a testament to human ingenuity and hubris wrapped in alien vines. It was both a marvel and a mess, like an artist who'd lost control halfway through their masterpiece and decided to just go with it. They reached the entrance, the doors wide open, as if mocking them to enter. It's a trap, Mira said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. But we're not exactly spoiled for choice, are we? Trap or not, we've got a job to do, Zamir said, stepping inside with the kind of confidence only someone with nothing to lose could muster. The interior was a tangled mess of wires and alien tech, everything buzzing with a life of its own. Eric could practically hear the sphere laughing at them, a low, rumbling chuckle that shook the floor beneath their feet. All right, Vila, Eric said, nodding towards the main console. Time to work your magic. Vila approached the console, her fingers already dancing across the datapad. This is it, she said, her voice steady. If this works, we might just save the day. And if it doesn't? Hal asked, ever the ray of sunshine. Then we'll have the satisfaction of knowing we went down swinging, Vila replied, not missing a beat. She connected the datapad to the console, the screens flaring to life with alien symbols that shifted and twisted in an unnerving display of technological malevolence. The room filled with a low hum, a sound that was almost comforting in its familiarity. Keep an eye out, Eric ordered, as if they needed reminding. We don't want to get blindsided while Vela's doing her thing. As they took up positions around the room, tension hung in the air like a bad smell. The kind of smell that clings to you long after you've left the room. Myra's eyes scanned the shadows, her weapon ready. I've got a bad feeling about this, she muttered, echoing a sentiment that was practically their team motto. Join the club, Hal said, glancing at the shifting shadows with a mix of wariness and disdain. Minutes stretched into eternity as Vila worked, the datapad flashing with a rapid sequence of commands. The alien tech responded, its systems flaring in resistance, a last-ditch effort to maintain control. Almost there, Vila said, her voice tight with concentration. Famous last words, Eric said, his grip on his weapon unwavering. The alien tech pulsed violently, as if sensing its imminent demise. The room trembled, the lights flickering in a chaotic dance that mirrored the city outside. "Brace yourselves," Zamir shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The Dyson Sphere's systems flared, the alien tech crackling with energy as it fought against the countermeasure. The tension was palpable, an electric charge that set their nerves on edge. Then, with a final keystroke, Vila executed the command. The datapad emitted a high-pitched whine, the sound growing in intensity until it was almost unbearable. The alien tech shuddered, its systems faltering as the countermeasure took hold. The room seemed to exhale, the oppressive weight lifting as the alien influence began to ebb. The effect was immediate and profound. Across the city, the streetlights flared to life, their light cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. The alien machines sputtered and died, their influence retreating like a tide. "It's working," Vila said, her voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. "About damn time," Mira commented, lowering her weapon as the immediate threat dissipated. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the sphere's restored systems. They stood amid the wreckage, the weight of their actions settling over them like a heavy cloak. "We did it," Eric said, a rare smile playing on his lips. "We actually did it, yeah, for now," Vila replied, her own smile tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead. "But we've got a lot of work to do." Their laughter echoed in the silence, a fragile thing that spoke of hope and defiance. They were far from finished, but in that moment, they allowed themselves the luxury of celebrating a win. "All right. Let's move," Eric said, leading them out of the hub. "We've got a city to save, and I'm not about to let a little thing like common sense get in the way." "Amen to that," Zamir agreed, his resolve as unyielding as ever. And so they set out, a band of weary warriors with hope in their hearts and sarcasm at the ready. In a city where nothing was certain, they were determined to write their own ending, one snarky comment at a time. As they navigated the now lit streets of Luminaris, the air was filled with the sounds of life returning to the city. People emerged from their homes, blinking in the sudden brightness, their expressions a mix of confusion and cautious optimism. "We've still got a long way to go," Vila said, her tone cautious. "But this is a start." "A start?" Mira echoed. "This is a goddamn miracle." "Don't get too comfortable," Hal warned. "We've shoved the aliens back, but they'll be licking their wounds somewhere, plotting their next move." "Which means we need a plan," Zamir said, his mind already racing ahead. "Something to keep them at bay." Eric nodded, his gaze sweeping over the city. "Luminaris has been through hell, but it's still standing. And as long as it is, we'll keep fighting." Their journey wasn't over, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. But for the first time in a long while, hope flickered in the darkness, a stubborn flame that refused to be snuffed out. And as they moved forward, leaving the hub and its secrets behind, they walked with purpose, their resolve renewed. In a universe that seemed determined to crush them, they stood defiant, ready to face whatever came next with grit, determination, and a healthy dose of sarcasm. "Here's to humanity," Eric muttered, as they disappeared into the night. "To humanity," the others echoed, their voices united in a rare moment of camaraderie. And so they continued, a band of misfits determined to reclaim their city and their future. In a world gone mad, they were the resistance, armed with nothing but hope and an unshakable belief in their own ability to prevail. Eric and his motley crew stumbled out of the control hub, blinking against the sudden flood of light. It was rare enough to see Luminaris fully lit, but it was even rarer to see people smiling. Hell, it was like spotting a unicorn in a shopping mall. If one existed, which it didn't, just like Eric's elusive retirement plan, a mythical creature in its own right. "Look at that," Eric said, gesturing to the streetlights that no longer flickered like a strobe at a bad rave. "Almost makes the city look like less of a death trap." "Almost," Mira quipped, her voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that could peel paint. "Still smells like one, though." And she wasn't wrong. The stench of burnt wires and fear still hung in the air, but at least for now, the city was breathing. Luminaris was a beast that refused to die, no matter how many times it got kicked in the teeth. Vila walked beside him, her datapad tucked under one arm like a treasured child. "You think we've really done it?" she asked, her voice uncertain but laced with the tiniest sliver of hope. Eric shrugged, doing his best impression of nonchalance. "We've done something, that's for sure. Whether it's good or bad, well, the jury's still out on that one. Jury's probably getting drunk in a bar somewhere, avoiding making a decision," Hal snorted, his gaze sweeping the city like a hawk. "Smart bastards." As they made their way through the streets, Zamir hung back slightly, his face inscrutable as ever. The man was a walking enigma, a riddle wrapped in a mystery wrapped in, well, probably more sarcasm. "What's on your mind?" Eric asked, falling into step beside him. Zamir's eyes flickered to him briefly, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "Just considering our next move. We've won a battle, but the war's far from over." "Story of our lives," Eric replied, shaking his head. "But hey, if it was easy, everyone would do it." "Yeah, and then we'd be out of a job," Mira added, ever the voice of eternal optimism. "Can't have that, can we?" It was a strange thing, this newfound lightness in their steps. Eric didn't trust it, not one bit. Like a cat that suddenly stops plotting your demise. Suspicious as hell, but even he couldn't deny there was something different in the air. Maybe it was the smell of burning alien tech. Or maybe, just maybe, it was hope. "Hey," Vila said, stopping abruptly. "Look." They all turned, following her gaze to where a group of children played in the street, their laughter ringing out like music. Real music, not the kind you hear when someone's trying to sell you something. "Think they know what just happened?" Mira asked, her voice softer than usual. "Doubt it," Hal replied. "And even if they did, they'd probably just turn it into some playground game. Capture the alien, or something." Eric chuckled, the sound foreign and rusty. "Capture the alien, huh? Maybe we should let them run the next mission. Not like we could do much worse." The kids continued to play, unfazed by the chaos that had so recently engulfed their world. It was a sight to behold, a glimpse of what they were fighting for, not just survival, but life. Actual, honest-to-goodness life. The kind that didn't involve brain-melting alien tech or existential dread. "All right," Eric said, clapping his hands together as if trying to dispel the warm fuzzies. "Let's get back to what we do best, complain about how everything's gone to shit." "Right," Vila said, her smile rueful. "Can't have us getting all soft and sentimental." They continued on, passing by groups of wary yet relieved citizens emerging from their hidey holes. The city was waking up, stretching its limbs and daring to hope. It was an uncomfortable feeling, this budding optimism. Like wearing a new pair of boots you weren't quite sure would fit but were determined to break in anyway. "Think we'll ever really be rid of the alien tech?" Vila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eric thought about it for a moment, weighing his answer like it was some kind of cosmic scale. "Doubt it, but maybe we can keep it under control. You know, like a bad rash." "Inspiring," Mira said dryly. "It's a wonder you're not giving motivational speeches for a living." "Hey, I'm just saying it like it is." They reached the outskirts of the city, the once menacing shadows now just shadows, not lurking threats. It was a nice change of pace, not feeling like death was breathing down their necks every second. Just every other second. "Okay, so what's the plan?" Hal asked, always the one to drag them back to reality. "Can't just sit around waiting for the next disaster to hit. We start fortifying," Zamir said, his voice calm and steady. "We've pushed them back for now, but we can't be complacent. Set up defenses, keep an eye on any remaining tech, and most importantly, find others like us." "Others like us?" Mira asked, eyebrows raised. "You mean people with a death wish and questionable hygiene?" Zamir's smile was slight but genuine. "People who haven't lost their minds to the tech. We're not the only ones left. We find them, we bring them in, and we rebuild." There was a pause as they considered the implications. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building something new, something better. A future where they weren't just waiting for the sky to fall on their heads. "And maybe," Eric added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "just maybe, I'll finally get that bar of mine." Laughter bubbled up around them, the sound rich and full. It was a rare thing, this unity, this sense of purpose. But then again, rare was their specialty. "We should call it the last laugh," Vila suggested, her eyes glinting with amusement. Perfectly fitting for our brand of optimism. Yeah, Eric agreed, nodding. And we'll serve drinks with names like The Doom and Cosmic Catastrophe. Sure to be a hit. As they made their way back into the heart of the city, they were greeted with cautious smiles and nods, signs of a tentative trust. It was a start, a small victory in a war that was far from over. But for now, it was enough. They had a long road ahead, fraught with challenges and uncertainty. But together, they would face it head-on, armed with nothing but grit, determination, and a sense of humor dark enough to swallow a black hole. And so they moved forward, a band of misfit heroes in a world that had long since forgotten what heroes looked like. They would rebuild, they would fight, and they would laugh in the face of despair. Because in the end, that's what humanity was. A stubborn, irreverent species that refused to go quietly into the night. To humanity, Eric murmured as they pressed on, the city stretching out before them, a blank canvas waiting to be filled. To humanity, the others echoed, their voices a tapestry of defiance and hope. And with that, they disappeared into the night, ready to face whatever the universe threw their way with a grin and a middle finger. In Luminaris, a city that had seen more than its fair share of chaos and despair, light and laughter returned. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was theirs. And for Eric and his crew, that was all that mattered. They had fought, they had won, and they would continue to fight. Because if there's one thing humanity is good at, it's surviving against all odds. As the city slowly came back to life, Eric couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. They were far from finished, but for now, they could breathe, regroup, and plan their next move. And maybe, just maybe, enjoy a well-deserved drink. Here's to us, he said, raising an imaginary glass to the sky. With a final nod, they set off into the night, a ragtag band of heroes with nothing but hope and sarcasm as their weapons. Ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with grit, determination, and an unshakable belief in their ability to prevail.